Can a murderer become a hero? In China, apparently yes. This is the story of an 8-day manhunt for a man who killed the village bully and somehow along the way became a folk hero to a huge chunk of the Chinese internet. And this happened in Xiping County in Henan province. And the man, his name is Xia Fugang, and he's 51 years old. He had just been arrested today, so the story is ending. But the problem is, this is not because police finally found him and outsmarted him, but because he was reported by a pear farm owner who turned him in for the bounty. And the Chinese internet has been tearing into this old man ever since. People are calling for a boycott of the pears from that particular region. His own village is reportedly shaming him for the betrayal, just to show you how serious the public opinion backlash is from, wanting to protect this man on his run to now ganging up on this pear guy. And so a man reports a wanted killer to the police, and yet he's the one that's getting treated like the villain. So how does the story work for this dynamic to form? Well, here's how it started. About 9 days ago, Xia came home to find his father had been beaten. His father made a living collecting recyclables, and he had gotten into an argument or something with a neighbor, a man who is known as sort of the village bully. His last name is Ho. Depending on who you ask, some think that he's either somebody with connection or the local village head, but he's somebody that doesn't seem to be liked in the area. And then Xia found out what happened to his father, and so he grabbed a knife and went to Ho's house. He murdered Ho, injured several others of Ho's relatives, and then he ran. He disappeared into the cornfields. And in Henan in the summer, the stalks grow over 2 meters tall around this time of the year, which is tall enough to swallow an entire guy. So for 8 days straight, Xia hid in the cornfields, and police threw everything they had at finding him, dozens of drones, helicopters, thermal imaging, like literally everything, officers. There's now even police presence and military officer presence in the village, and people have been shipped in around the clock looking for this guy, to the point where they started cutting down the crop just to strip away his cover. And somehow he managed to evade all of it. Not because he was some criminal mastermind, but because a lot of people were apparently helping him along the way, didn't want him to be found.
兄弟，看到没有？这个地方非常隐蔽，这是我的隐蔽。我给你搁了有水，有啤酒，有方便面。我跟你说老实儿，你背弃了，上电车店也给你充狙了，慢等等。
3 days into the search, police offered a reward, 50,000 yuan for directly helping capture him, 20,000 for information. A lot of money for this guy, right? So there's no reason for people to not spot him and report him. And this was a system to assume that people would take the deal. Yet nobody ratted him out. Instead, villagers started leaving him supplies, water. There's videos on the internet, users putting down food, snacks, drinks of different sorts in their own fields to help the man evade arrest and to keep him from being hungry. And the reason is really interesting because he just murdered somebody. If he was really that bad, people would probably be afraid. And there were even claims that people built heat sources in the field to burn the crops to throw off the thermal cameras to distract them, to try to kind of divert the attention this way. And one phrase that kept showing up in videos was that we may lack money, but we don't lack morality. One local woman put it about as clearly as it can get.
西平县哪位大哥啊？现在传网都是为了你啊！本身我这都不该浇地，明天今天是没雨，明天后天这1个星期都有雨，但是我也得要浇地。为啥要浇地？都是怕你路过咱这儿没有一口水喝啊！还有咱身边还有很多人都是因为不该浇地的情况下，他都在浇地。还有咱们这儿更不会有一个人为了那5万块钱出卖自己的良心哈。
People weren't cheering for the killing. They were cheering because they saw themselves in Xia, ordinary people who would spend years getting pushed around by somebody with a little bit of power, and then somebody finally did something. On August 8th, it ended. Xia was caught only about 10 kilometers, like 5 miles from where this all started. He didn't really flee far. He'd just been circling close to home the entire time. He ended up near a pear orchard, and it was here that there's a pond. He was thirsty, and then he went for some water. And then an old man watching over the orchard spotted him, and here's the part where it's hard to believe, because after 8 days of dodging everything, drones and people and thermal cameras, Xia had a whole conversation with this pear farmer guy. The old man quietly called the police on him, and officers showed up, and Xia was arrested within the hour. And then, obviously, this is where we are today. The internet anger flipped over to the pear farmer. People called him greedy, said that he sold out his conscience for a bounty. Some started organizing the boycott of pears grown in this particular region, like entirely. Like people were just like really mad at this guy, right? Like especially today. Around the same time, the official notice had painted Xia as a serial killer, claiming that he injured multiple people while he was running away. Clearly, seems unbelievable, considering the fact that people offered to help him to evade the arrest. If he was truly that bad, that violent, we'd probably hear more stories about how he was hurting people, and yet we didn't. People claimed to be his neighbors pushed back further, saying that he hadn't touched anyone outside of the original incident. By that same logic, too, if you think about if Xiao was really a serial killer, why would he just start a conversation with the pear farmer? Instead of telling him his whole story, he can just tie the guy up or kill him, or because he would be suspicious that anyone he comes across could potentially report him. But of course, by the time Xiao was in custody, he still doesn't seem to realize that this guy had reported him. So, the facts don't line up with who they're trying to portray Xia to be. Obviously, the government, he was not just a simple case of a suspect. He was more like a symbol of something bigger that was bound to happen if they don't fully stop it, right? To a huge number of people online, of course, he was something else entirely. He was the guy who finally hit back against authority, even if it means that the authority was just some bully. Now, the man that he stabbed, Ho, became the stand-in for every local strongman, every local politician. People who's ever gotten away with anything, pushing people around, or lived in the gray areas of the law, or made their own rules. And so at the same time, Xia became sort of the stand-in for people who were willing to, after swallowing that kind of treatment for so long, was willing to do something. Again, this whole situation is built on the idea that China has a twisted justice system, right? It only works to certain people or bend to certain people. And so when the state goes after somebody, it almost feels like you're supporting the opposite. When they're pursuing justice, or so-called justice, in this case, they're actually pursuing the wrong truth. Yes, he did murder someone. Like, that's not going to change. He will be found guilty as a murderer, right? But the reaction from the internet users tell us that China's justice system is twisted and messed up. The birth of Xia, the murderer, is already a reflection of the lack of justice. And the government needs to ensure that Xia, of course, stays a feared killer to the rest of the public. They don't want to pay as much attention if this guy is truly somebody that's so dangerous, right? They create the fear of various different groups the CCP has ever persecuted, right? Every single one of them. June 4th, 1989, the state claimed that the students were violent protesters. They killed soldiers. And therefore, the reason tanks rolled in was because they had to be crushed, right? In 2001, the state manufactured a self-immolation case in front of Tiananmen Square to justify the persecution of Falun Gong adherents because they needed to make the case for the group being violent. They're setting themselves on fire. They're crazy. And then they also used that same excuse to justify to kill members of the group for their organs, live organ harvesting. And they set up concentration camps in Xinjiang to put Uyghurs into them because that's to curb the so-called domestic terrorism. And so they make all these excuses to discredit, destroy the people, and then censor whatever happened. And so they rewrite the history of every single time. And so whether it's a man, a single guy, or a group, they do the exact same thing. And this story just tells us it's the second story of resistance within a single month. And it tells us that it spells honestly at the end of the dynasty, so to speak. There's so much chaos and so many of these stories coming out every single day in China. But this one is very significant in my opinion. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoy the content. Let me know your thoughts about the story in the comment. And as always, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.